In the winter of 1777, America was not yet a nation. It was an idea, fragile, bleeding, and close to death. Snow covered the fields of Pennsylvania like a white grave cloth, stretching endlessly under a silent sky. The wind cut through torn coats and bare skin, howling like a warning from nature itself. In a narrow valley near the Schuylkill River, nearly 12,000 men huddled together, not as an army of victory, but as survivors clinging to hope. This place was called Valley Forge, and for the Continental Army, it became a test that nearly destroyed the American Revolution. The British believed the war was already won. They had captured Philadelphia, the largest city in the colonies. The Continental Congress had fled. European powers watched closely, convinced the rebellion would soon collapse under its own weakness. To the world, America looked finished. But history was about to be written, not in grand victories or triumphant parades, but in hunger, frostbite, disease, and sacrifice. George Washington arrived at Valley Forge on December 19, 1777. He rode through the camp slowly, his face tight with concern. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. Men without shoes left bloody footprints in the snow. Some wrapped their feet in rags or pieces of old blankets. Others had nothing at all. Entire regiments lacked coats. Soldiers shivered uncontrollably, their bodies weakened by months of poor food and constant marching. There was almost no meat, no bread, no proper shelter. Supplies promised by Congress had not arrived. Wagons were lost, stolen, or delayed by corruption and incompetence. Farmers, desperate to protect their own families, sold food to the British for higher prices. The Army of Independence was starving in the shadow of enemy comfort. Disease spread faster than hope. Typhus, dysentery, pneumonia, and smallpox tore through the camp. Makeshift hospitals overflowed with men crying out in pain, many dying not from bullets, but from sickness and neglect. Every morning, bodies were carried out and buried in frozen ground. Desertion became a daily fear. Why stay? Why suffer? Why die for an idea that might never survive? Washington asked himself these questions every night. He wrote letters, dozens of them, to Congress, to governors, to anyone who might listen. His words were desperate, sometimes angry, always honest. If the army does not get supplies, it will disband. But Washington did not leave. He stayed among his men, sharing their misery, refusing comfort. He rode through the camp daily, speaking to soldiers, listening to their stories, offering what little encouragement he could. His presence mattered more than he knew, because if Washington broke, the army would break with him. Inside crude log huts built by the soldiers themselves, men crowded together for warmth. They told stories of home, of farms and families they might never see again. Some wrote final letters, hands shaking from cold, ink freezing before the words were finished. Many of those letters were never sent. By February, nearly 2,000 men had died at Valley Forge, not in battle, but from hunger, cold, and disease. And yet, something extraordinary began to happen. Instead of collapsing, the army slowly transformed. A Prussian officer named Baron von Steuben arrived at the camp. He had no official rank at first, barely spoke English, and swore loudly in multiple languages. But he understood discipline, training, and modern warfare. Von Steuben began drilling the troops relentlessly. He taught them how to march properly, how to load and fire faster, how to fight as a unified force instead of scattered militias. He trained officers to lead from the front, to care for their men, to enforce standards. At first, the soldiers hated it. They were exhausted, hungry, sick, but gradually they began to change. They stood straighter, they moved together, they became an army. At the same time, reforms improved sanitation, camps were cleaned, latrines were placed farther from living quarters, simple rules saved thousands of lives. Food distribution slowly improved, supplies finally began to arrive. Spring came, the snow melted, and with it, something else emerged from Valley Forge: confidence. When the Continental Army marched out of the camp in June 1778, they were no longer a broken force. They faced the British in open battle at Monmouth, proving they could stand toe-to-toe with the world's strongest military. Valley Forge did not win the war, but without it, America would have lost everything. This was the winter that almost killed America. Yet it was also the winter that created it. Valley Forge changed the war in ways the British never understood. To the outside world, the camp had looked like a mass grave waiting to happen. British officers in Philadelphia believed Washington's army would simply disappear by spring. Spies reported starvation and sickness. Loyalist newspapers mocked the rebellion, calling it a failed experiment led by desperate men. But what they could not see was the invisible transformation happening inside that frozen valley. The men who survived Valley Forge were no longer farmers pretending to be soldiers. They had endured the worst winter of their lives together. Hunger had stripped away comfort. Death had stripped away illusion. What remained was something harder, quieter, and far more dangerous to the British Empire: commitment. For many soldiers, Valley Forge became the place where the war stopped being political and became personal. Private Joseph Plum Martin later wrote that the cold was so severe that men slept sitting up, pressed together like animals, because lying down meant freezing. He described nights when the wind cut through the huts as if they were made of paper. He described the sound of coughing that never stopped, echoing through the camp long after darkness fell. These men were not famous. They were not generals. History would never carve their names into marble statues, but they were the backbone of the American Revolution. Every day, Washington fought not only the British, but doubt within his army and within himself. Some officers whispered that he should be replaced. Others blamed Congress. Congress blamed the states blamed each other. The revolution was fractured, disorganized, and fragile. Washington understood something crucial. If the army fell apart, the dream of independence would die with it. There would be no second chance. So he made a decision that defined his leadership. He chose unity over ego. He tolerated criticism. He accepted foreign help. He empowered capable men regardless of background. Von Steuben, once dismissed as an outsider, became the architect of a professional army. Nathaniel Greene restructured supply lines. Officers were held accountable. Corruption, though not eliminated, was confronted. Slowly, painfully, order emerged from chaos. The suffering at Valley Forge also changed how the world viewed America. Word of the Army's endurance reached Europe. France, watching carefully, saw not a collapsing rebellion, but a movement willing to bleed for its independence. In 1778, France formally allied with the United States, a decision that would ultimately tilt the war in America's favor. That alliance can be traced, in part, to that frozen valley, because Valley Forge proved something the world had doubted: America would not quit. When spring arrived, it did not bring relief immediately. Many soldiers were too weak to celebrate. Graves still dotted the hillsides. Families back home still starved. Victory was still years away. But the army that marched out of Valley Forge was different from the one that entered. They marched in formation. They followed commands with precision. They believed in each other and in the cause. For the first time, the Continental Army looked like the army of a nation. The battle at Monmouth was brutal and chaotic, fought under extreme heat, but when the Continental Army held the line against British regulars, the message was clear. These men would not run. The British noticed. The war dragged on, costly and exhausting, yet the foundation had been laid. Every later success, every alliance, every battlefield victory, every negotiation rested on the fact that the army had survived its darkest hour. Valley Forge became more than a place. It became a symbol, a reminder that America was not born in comfort or certainty, but in sacrifice. The men who died there never saw the Declaration fulfilled. They never celebrated independence. They never lived to see the flag raised over a free nation. Many were buried without markers, their stories lost to time. But without them, there would be no United States. Today, Valley Forge is quiet. Tourists walk peaceful paths. Children laugh where soldiers once froze. Monuments stand where men once collapsed from hunger. The wind still moves through the trees, but it no longer carries the sound of suffering. Yet the truth remains, written into the soil. America came closer to dying at Valley Forge than almost any other moment in its history, and it survived, not because it was strong, but because ordinary men refused to give up. This was the winter that almost killed America, and the winter that proved it deserved to live. Long after the army marched away, Valley Forge refused to fade into silence. The war continued for years, filled with victories and losses, treaties and betrayals. Names like Yorktown and Saratoga would later shine in history books. But for the men who had lived through the winter of 1777, no battlefield ever matched what they endured in that valley. Because Valley Forge was not about tactics, it was about endurance. Many of the soldiers who survived never returned to normal life. Frost-bitten feet left some crippled forever. Lung disease followed others to early graves. Trauma, though unnamed at the time, haunted them in sleepless nights and sudden silences. They carried the winter with them long after the snow had melted. When independence was finally won in 1783, celebration filled the streets. Bells rang, flags waved, speeches praised liberty and victory. But few speeches spoke of Valley Forge. Congress struggled to pay the men who had given everything. Promises of pensions were delayed or forgotten. Veterans returned home to poverty, broken bodies, and land that could no longer feed them. Some begged, some drank, some simply disappeared from the record. The nation they helped create moved forward. They were left behind. Yet Valley Forge shaped America in ways that go far beyond the battlefield. It forged the idea that freedom is not granted, it is endured for. That leadership is not about glory, but responsibility. That unity, even when imperfect, can hold a fragile dream together. George Washington never forgot the winter. As the first president, he carried its lessons into every decision. He resisted becoming a king because he had seen what unchecked power cost ordinary men. He insisted on civilian control of the military because he knew what happened when soldiers were neglected by politics. Valley Forge taught him humility. It taught the nation restraint. Over time, the story became quieter, buried beneath newer triumphs and louder myths. School books reduced it to a paragraph. Tour guides summarized months of suffering in minutes. The raw truth became uncomfortable, a reminder that America's birth was not clean or heroic, but desperate and painful. Yet, forgetting Valley Forge means forgetting something essential. Because America was not saved by strength alone. It was saved by people who stayed when leaving would have been easier, by men who shivered through nights they did not think they would survive, by soldiers who believed in a future they would never see. The winter of 1777 did not just test an army, it tested an idea. And that idea, liberty, imperfect and fragile, survived because ordinary people refused to let it die. Today, when the wind moves through Valley Forge, it carries no gunfire, no cries of hunger, but it carries memory of bare feet in snow, of frozen ink on unfinished letters, of a nation that almost ended before it began. This was the winter that almost killed America, and the winter that revealed what America truly was.